which is amazing.
And then how do you get to your office from?
So the North Berkeley BART station, they do casual carpool to Civic Center.
Oh.
So it drops off, I get out like a stoplight early. It drops off at, I get off at like Mission and 9th.
Oh, okay.
And then our office is effectively Mission and 12th.
Right.
So I just walk the 3 or 4 blocks.
Right.
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
Getting to North Berkeley BART is sometimes a little bit of a pain, but my parents are retired and my mom really likes to be able to get 10 minutes in the car with me every morning. And so she'll like drive by and pick me up.
That's sweet.
I know, I'm like, am I 12 years old? I have that moment every now and then I let that go and I was like, you know what? Should we start? Sure. Yeah. Okay. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. Roll call. Yes.
Commissioner Jennings?
Here.
Commissioner McLeod?
Here.
Chair Waddy?
Here. It looks like we're expecting Commissioner Kent, but he is not yet here.
Yeah.
All right. That brings us on to item 3 on our agenda, which are ex parte communications. Ex parte communications include verbal and written communications between commissioners and any party with interest on a pending item on the agenda. Are there any?
No.
Nope. All right, with that, item 4 on our agenda is the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted on by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the commission, and there will be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of the commission or a member of the audience requests removal from the consent calendar. We have several items. First up, item 4-1, the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes from April 24th. Item 4-2, Planning Application 19-029, Design Review and Parking Exception for a Single-Story Addition at 911 Pomona. Item 4-3, Permit Application 19-030, Design Review and Conditional Use for a 2-story addition at 837 Stannage. Are there any members of the public that would like to pull one of those items off? Any commissioners?
No, I have no objection to any of those items.
I would like to talk briefly about 837 Stannage, which is item 4-3.
Okay, would you like to pull that off consent for discussion?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, then with that, is there a motion to approve items 4-1 and 4-2 on the consent calendar?
I can make that motion.
Okay, there's a second. Great. Roll call vote. Any opposed? Nope. All right, seeing all, items 4-1 and 4-2 are approved as proposed. And for item 4-2, just remember there is a 14-day appeal period associated with that. So that brings us to item 4-3, permit application 19-030, design review and conditional use for 837 Stannage. Do you want to have a presentation first, or?
Well, maybe we can just cut to the question or point that I had, which, because when I read the agenda, it referred to a vertical extension of a non-conforming wall. And then when I read the staff report, it talked about just the conditional use permit apparently just applying to this 8 square foot area to make it flush with the existing non-conforming wall. And then from looking at the plans, it looks like there's both a vertical extension and this small horizontal extension of a non-conforming wall. And I just wanted to clarify that that my understanding of that is correct, and that we're actually granting a conditional use permit for both of those extensions. To the extent that that is what we're being asked to propose or to approve, I think there's support for, for doing both of those things, but it just wasn't totally clear to me what we were being asked to approve and what the specific findings were in support of that. So this is just more of a request for clarification, and then if we are being asked to approve both of those, then I just want to make sure that the documentation of the approval clearly reflects that it's both a horizontal and a vertical extension.
So the conditional use permit definitely pertains to that 8 square foot horizontal extension on the ground floor. Based on the plans on sheet AP01, it looks like the second story addition does not intersect with that area, but I may defer to the architect regarding that. And you can see it's right there on the projection right there.
Yeah, and I mean, I only have the small printout, but it looks to me like it's flush on the kind of 3D rendering. It looks like it's flush with the existing non-conforming wall. And that is what it says in the agenda as well.
So if
Or
we're
it
going to
refers to
look
a
at
vertical
this
extension of the
graphic,
agenda.
so I think we're talking about this addition here, and then on
Yeah, so it's everything
other
that's in
side.
pink.
pink, okay.
So yeah, on the second story, again, that looks from this rendering like it's,
Yeah.
lush.
Sort of
It is.
the same plan as the first floor.
Vertical extension.
Yeah.
So if the first floor needs a conditional use, the second floor should need a conditional use.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So again, I don't have any particular concerns about that. I just wanted to clarify. So. That's all.
Okay. Are you comfortable with us making a motion then?
Yeah.
Move this along?
Yeah.
Okay.
Amend, do we have to add the extra extension to the approval, or?
We can prepare additional findings as part of your action to reflect both that lower level wall and the upper level wall.
Okay, great.
Okay, well then I would move for approval of item 4-3 at 837 Stannage Ave with the clarification in the record. So we're making findings for both vertical and horizontal extensions.
I can second that.
Great. All in support?
Aye.
Aye.
Any in opposition? Seeing none, that motion is approved. Project permit application 19-030 for a conditional use and design review is approved. And just remember to keep the story poles up, 14-day appeal period. Great. With that, that brings us to item 5 on our agenda, general public comment. This is open to persons desiring to address the commission on an item that is not otherwise listed on the agenda, and each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on an item not on the agenda? Nope. Seeing none, we will close the public comment and move on to item 6, discussion and possible action on our regular agenda. First up, item 6-1, which is a study session for planning application 19-033, design review for a lower level conversion at 958 Neilson.
Thank you. Before you tonight is a study session discussion of some lower level excavation work that was commenced at 958 Neilson without a building permit. So I'll walk you through kind of the context and then the options for a potential commission discussion. But we're really looking to you tonight to give some guidance to the applicant about what would be supported going forward to remedy the situation. The subject lot is 2,700 square feet, and it has an existing 1,155 square foot, it's actually a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home that was built in 1927 and added on to in 2015. It's an unusual shaped lot where it has 51 feet of frontage and 53 feet of depth. A variance was approved to accommodate a bathroom enclosure in 2015. It was ultimately a total of 15 square feet additional. And most recently, this may look familiar to you because you looked at an encroachment permit request last November for a non-engineered wall that's located in the public right-of-way portion at the front of the property. So the more recent request involves a response to an inquiry that staff received about the presence of debris removal trucks that were parked in front of the home and whether or not building permits had been issued. Upon looking at our records, we couldn't locate any permits that had been issued, and so our building inspector went out, talked to the contractor, observed some excavation, that legal ceiling height was being created in that space, and subsequently issued a stop work order. So with this application, the applicant has applied for design review to legalize approximately 525 square feet of lower level space for storage with a proposed interior ceiling height of 7 feet 10 inches. And this is a street view of the property as it appears today. This is a shot of that wall that was looked at about 7 months ago. Just to give you a snapshot of the property characteristics, on a lot of this size, the code allows an expansion of up to 1,500 square feet. Currently, the home is at 1,155 square feet, so this allows for an additional area of up to 345 square feet. What has been prepared thus far exceeds that at 525 square feet, so there's an overbuild of about 180 square feet. And this is a snapshot of the floor plan of the main living quarters. And one thing that I wanted to clarify is that there is an interior connection from the upstairs into that lower level area and the garage. So there is an interior connection from the main dwelling. And this is the proposed lower level area, so you can see the corresponding stairs, and then it's this portion of the lower level that's proposed to have the 7 foot 10 inch ceiling height. There's also access taken from the garage. With respect to floor area ratio, the commission does have the authority to exclude from the FAR lower level area provided that the average perimeter height is less than 5 feet. So when we look at that, we ask the applicant to provide measurements from the exterior, from the natural grade to the top of finished floor. We sum that all up and then divide it by 4. If it's less than 5 feet, that area can be excluded. However, in this case, the average height is in excess of that at about 5.5 feet. So that lower level area cannot be excluded from the floor area ratio calculations. And this is the exhibit in your staff report that shows the corresponding heights in property corners and their height from the grade to the top of finished floor. And this was some work, just to give you an idea of kind of the rawness of the space. This was actually from some foundation repair work that was done in 2015. As I understand it now, that interior space is still, largely dirt and foundation. It hasn't been conditioned. There's no sheetrock or anything of that sort in the area. So in terms of options, there is the potential to approve a 345 square foot addition and add a condition to eliminate or cover up a portion of that space, as well as the option to do a deed restriction due to the lack of code compliant egress. So right now there is the interior access, there is no exterior access, so there would be no way to get any sort of egress compliance for habitability. Similarly, you could consider a variance to exceed the allowable floor area if you concluded that there were unique circumstances with the property. If you were to direct us to pursue this, we'd want to seek some specific direction because this would set a precedent given the circumstances. We did receive one email correspondence which was forwarded to you on Monday. The project is categorically exempt from Section 1, pursuant to CEQA from Section 15303. And with that, we're really seeking some general guidance from the commission about how to proceed going forward. And based on the direction provided tonight, we would come back to you with a recommendation.
Are there any questions of staff?
Well, I was just wondering, the excavation that's been done, there hasn't been any concrete foundation work been done as part of that? Or I'm just kind of wondering how far they've gone with
I will defer that to the applicant. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think so, but I will let him answer that.
Okay, well, we can have the applicant come later. Other than that, the setbacks, the houses within the setbacks, I'm having a little hard time reading some of the plans. But is the proposed area all within the setbacks?
So the proposed area is all within the building envelope.
And the envelope is all within?
Yeah, with the
It's
exception.
mostly that lower, I think, left corner.
Yeah, I believe the house has, it has conforming front and side yard setbacks. It does not have a rear yard setback due to the 53-foot depth. And I believe when it was approved with the variance, I think the rear yard setback is in the ballpark of about 5 or 6 feet,
Okay.
where 20 would normally be required.
Do you have other questions? Or?
No, that's it, thanks.
What was the dimension of the area that was being excavated?
525 square feet.
And has that excavation, has that all been completed? Has that whole area been?
I think it's mostly been completed.
Okay. I was curious if the applicant has provided any information that would support granting a variance in this case. Have they identified any reason that they think
No,
there's unique circumstances here, or?
we actually haven't asked that of the applicant at this point in time. We wanted to bring this to the commission first. If that is something, though, that you conclude, you could make the findings for it. We'd have them amend their application request.
I did have one question. So you said that interior stair is existing. So there's been an interior stair leading to just a dirt floor?
I think that's correct.
years?
Yeah.
Okay.
And one more question. What is the minimum, does 7 feet 10 inches meet the minimum ceiling height for
Habitability.
habitable
Yeah.
space? What's the minimum? Is it 710?
The minimum is actually 7 feet.
7 feet, okay.
So in other such scenarios, we've actually had people, keep it at a 6'10" ceiling height or some point slightly lower so that it doesn't count towards floor area ratio.
So even though you can exclude floor area if the surrounding perimeter is less than 5 feet?
That's
But
correct.
if it's taller than 5 feet, it still isn't counted against floor area?
The way we've looked at
Sure.
it is that basically if someone is excavating to where they're creating a legal ceiling height, that kind of raises a red flag for us on that the space could technically be converted. If it's under that 7-foot threshold, it legally doesn't meet the definition under the California Building Code. So we tend to look at that with a little more flexibility.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions? Any, Commissioner Kent?
So currently, it's all dirt. These steps come down to dirt. There's no walkway going to the garage. And it's being excavated to the level of the existing garage. That's the idea? 'Cause,
You mean with respect to the existing slab in the garage?
yeah, the existing slab of the garage to the ceiling below is, the ceiling above is 7 feet 10 inches. So that's just basically what was being excavated there is a continuation of the grade of the garage floor.
I think that's correct, but we can have the applicant confirm that.
All right. Well, with that, why don't we ask the applicant to come on up and give a presentation?
Hi, I'm Anton. So we bought the house in 2014, and it did have an existing basement that was cemented. It was cracked. Had the foundation done, the center wall and the back perimeter wall and the garage wall, foundation walls. And at the time, we didn't have time to finish up the cementing the floor, so we left it till now. It was 7.2, which the garage is 7.2, cemented. I remember talking to someone here, and they're saying that he was pouring a driveway in Albany. He said he didn't need a permit to pour cement in driveway. So this was kind of my thought too, that we didn't need to pull a permit to cement our existing walkable basement. We did excavate from 7.2 to 7.10 because or lower because we wanted a 4-inch pad, rock, sand, rebar, and here we are, existing staircase to an existing lower basement. And so I'm not. What questions do you guys have?
I guess,
So, yeah, so it was, right now it's 7 feet 2 inches.
Now it's to the dirt. I think it's like around 8 feet right now.
Okay.
But the finish we're thinking is
Before you
7 foot
started,
10.
it was 7 feet 2.
7'2", roughly around there. Yes, correct.
And was it a rat slab you had in there before, or was it
It
actually?
was. So when we moved in, there was a rat slab, but then we did the foundation around that area, and we hadn't had the funds at that time to finish the floor, and so we waited until now. This is around 2015 is when we did that foundation work.
What will the finished height be once you pour?
7'10",
Concrete?
concrete, yes.
You've excavated 8 feet,
Excavated roughly 8 feet, yeah.
and then you're going to add 4 inches of rock, 4 inches of concrete?
Yeah, plus or minus, yeah. So it's finished.
So you'd be at 7'4", or?
Well, then maybe we excavated a little more than 8 feet, yeah. But we haven't undermined the foundation at all. Footing is still completely underneath, buried by the dirt. Because we had planned.
The work you did in 2015 was deep enough so that you
Correct.
haven't undermined that
Correct.
foundation?
Correct.
And that was on the back, the garage, and the center wall?
Yeah, this is the center wall, the side, yeah, the back wall, and the garage wall, correct.
So all 4 sides?
All 4 sides, correct.
Oh, okay, so you're just excavating down, so that's all been engineered? You have permits for all that concrete work?
Correct. The pad is going to be floating, so there's going to be a foam or that, expansion joint padding, so it's not going to be tied into the foundation, which the inspector asked us to do.
Actually, can I just ask a clarifying question? You asked about the issuance of permits. You referring to, there was foundation work that was done in 2015, but there aren't permits?
I think for the floor, yeah.
Yeah.
Permits for the perimeter foundation plus the center walls adjacent, the intermediate walls?
Correct.
this sort of spawns a question back to staff on this. So if the original condition prior to the foundation work was roughly in the ballpark of somewhere between 7.6, 7.10 head clearance with a concrete floor, what's the difference between sort of where that started and where we are today? That seems like there's not a whole lot of delta in my eyes between the two scenarios, unless there's not permit documentation of that, or what's sort of the difference between the conditions?
To be honest with you, we may have to look into that further, but I mean, my understanding is at the time, we treated it as a repair and replace and that everything was going to stay the same. When our inspector went out, he observed the movement and that increase in ceiling height. So we'd have to look at that delta. I think my previous documentation showed that the ceiling height down there varied, but it was more in the ballpark of 5 to 6 feet. But I'd have to defer to the applicant in terms of what the prior conditions were.
So if the situation was that the full space had a concrete floor and it was above a 7-foot head height across the entire space, then this really wouldn't be of issue right now because it would already be counted against floor area, and it's kind of a moot point if they're already sort of existing non-conforming.
Right.
Okay.
One of the other issues in this is that those foundation permits were never closed out properly. So there's also a little discrepancy issue based on the current work that's been done.
So really the crux of this is sort of predicated on a presumption that we're taking what was non-floor area sort of counted space, meaning that it was below 7 feet, and it's being converted into space that's over 7 feet. Okay. So it sounds like maybe there's some homework for the applicant to do.
Yeah, I never finalized our permit there.
But maybe also to try to find some either photographic documentation or other documentation to demonstrate if it truly was, no net new increase in height significantly above 7 feet.
Yeah.
Because that changes the conversation for the commission to
I
opine
don't think we have
on.
any pictures of the basement. I'll look, but I don't think we have any pictures of the basement when we moved in.
Okay.
The garage is as it was, and that's a 7'2" ceiling, and you would walk straight from the garage into that basement area if if that helps.
So the steps, you said you're adding more, well, you're adding several more steps to get down.
Yeah, I think I've added 3 more, I believe, two or 3 more.
Okay, so that's a, foot and a half or so. Can that be an indication of the original grade where the steps ended?
No, because there was 2 cement kind of stairs that they're not there anymore. We took out. Yeah. I think there was 2 cement stairs, and we are going a little bit lower than the garage. There's going to be a step from the garage into that spot.
And it's never been a conditioned space.
Yeah, there was a cement there. It was not
No, but
in
I
good
mean,
condition.
no.
It wasn't sheetrocked. There were lights
no
down there,
heating,
plugs.
No heating.
No heating ducts, but
Not
there was
really improved in the sense of electrical work and,
open studs. Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Any other questions for the applicant?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we will now open it up for public comment on this item. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak on 958 Neilson? No? Okay, seeing none, public comment on this item is closed, and we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. Are there any thoughts from the commission on this one?
Well, I could start. It's a funny situation. If it had been over 7 feet before, then it's an interesting question as to whether that would have been kind of a grandfathered in part of the square footage, but it was never documented in the previous building permit application. The previous building permit application should have had the square footage listed, the FAR listed, correct? And that would not have included any of this floor area that we're talking about? Is that-
When we had the application for the bathroom addition, at that time, we excluded the lower level area. And we noted in the staff report that based on what was submitted, the ceiling height in that lower level area was about 5 feet. It varied depending on the grade, but it was well under 7 feet.
Not 7 feet.
Yeah.
So it wasn't considered part of the floor area ratio at that time, So it seems like, unless there's documentation to the contrary, I would have to assume that it was not habitable space, or not 7 foot, at least overall, maybe in some spots, but he does have a legal right to improve 400-something square feet, right? Or
345.
Or 345, right. So if the project were limited to that square footage area, I would have absolutely no problem with it, assuming that all the permits are submitted for and approved and engineering drawings done. I'm not inclined to approve a variance. I really do not think that would be appropriate. It wouldn't be consistent with other projects we've looked at either, where we have placed deed restrictions on spaces like this that are habitable height, but outside the floor area restrictions. So I don't think that would be consistent. So I wouldn't approve a variance. So those are my thoughts. That's all. Thanks.
Yeah, similarly, I guess, in the absence of, as Commissioner Waddy was saying, if we were dealing with a situation where we knew that this was previously, over 7 feet and it was a non-conforming space before any of this work was done, I think it's very easy to authorize a continuation and just minor repairs to that use, but it's different when we're talking about going from, something that wasn't previously habitable to something that would be. And in the absence of any evidence that there's grounds to grant a variance, I do think this would be a concerning precedent to set. So I would generally be, comfortable with approving something at that height that is 345 square feet or less, or something that's the full area but not a habitable height. But I don't think we have a basis under our code to do both. unless there is some additional information that can be pulled out of the historical record that shows actually, what we're dealing with is not really a change from the past condition.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And I do agree, but there looks like there's several places we can look to get the historical information. The sale of the property would show the square footage, and I wouldn't think they'd leave out a hunk of square footage that could be habitable. Right? Wouldn't that be part of the sales? So if it's not in that, then that might lead you to believe that it wasn't considered habitable, which would mean it would be less than whatever the 5 footers. So photos would be great if you could find photos. The other one would be record of excavation. Obviously you excavated stuff and you have some off-haul bills. Maybe that could show how much was excavated over the last few weeks. Give us a sense of what was taken out. It'd be it seems funny to make you fill it, to bring it up to a illegal habit. In a second, maybe the chair can let you speak. And but I would absolutely be on board with the 345 square feet, which you're able to do. More than that, I think I agree with 2 other commissioners that we need show some proof that it was already excavated over the habitable height prior to this recent work.
Great. And I'll just chime in on that. I think I'll sort of echo the thoughts of my fellow commissioners. I have just pulled up the Redfin listing from when it was sold, and the description does mention a downstairs bonus room, laundry, workshop, and office. So what I would say is I think, there's a lot of incentive here, I think, for you to try to do a little research and see if you can find any documentation that shows that was legal head height, because then this conversation can go away. I think if there isn't any proof of existing conditions, and this is what I always say to folks who start the work without permit, is unfortunately it puts us in a bit of a predicament when we can't actually go out there and take a look at the existing conditions of the site. Because if we were just dealing with a proposal, staff could go out on a site visit, verify that it was of legal head height, and none of this would be of issue. So it puts us in a little bit of a more challenging position when people already start the work, because there's not that baseline from which to actually get all of the facts. But it does look like from the listing that there might have been something approved down there. So I'd suggest trying to figure that out without any evidence that the city is comfortable with as a baseline. I do think opening up the sort of a variance for FAR is a little debatable for me to be able to support that. I would definitely be supportive of a larger conversation, I think, about what the city's FARs are, especially for some of the smaller properties in the city. But I think that needs to be a comprehensive conversation and not a one-off for this property. So I would have some concerns about that. Certainly you have some extra square footage of wiggle room that we could certainly improve. But I think any more than that, I would have some hesitation about. So I don't know if staff, I think we've all sort of said our piece on this. Staff, do you guys have any other input that you'd like from the commission?
I think we have an idea of where you're heading with this, so.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, we will close the study session, item 6-1, and move on to item 7 on our agenda, which is new business. Item 7-1, planned development area update. That was approved on the consent calendar. So that was listed as a consent item that was approved at the beginning of the hearing right at 7 o'clock.
Oh, okay, so
It's approved.
Yeah, I'm the neighbor, so I.
Oh, yes, it was approved right at the beginning of the hearing.
Oh, I see. Thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for your patience while I queued that up. This is an introductory session for you on some things that are going on in regional planning. And what I'd like to do is kind of give you an overview and try to answer your questions. I don't pretend to completely understand all of this, but if I can't answer your questions, we'll take them back and try to get good answers for you. The ABAG MTC, which is one organization with two names. I'll just stick with ABAG for simplicity, but that's Association of Bay Area Governments. They're integrated in with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. They are required to prepare a regional plan that integrates economic and demographic projections along with regional transportation investment plans and affordable housing mandates. This is a state requirement that started about 10 years ago with some of the legislation, AB 35 and SB 375 that came out of the state legislature about 10 years or so ago. These plans are prepared every 3 or 4 years and are generally called Plan Bay Area. The latest version that they're starting to work on is Plan Bay Area 2050. At a high level, this is really important work, and it's good that we're integrating our investments in different types of infrastructure and policy objectives all in one document, but the details are very important, and it could have serious implications for Albany and other communities. One of the things that comes out of this planning effort is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. The RHNA is the acronym that's frequently used, and it's a numerical target of the number of housing units that each community in the Bay Area needs to plan for. And it's not just the number of units, but number of units by different income category. And the planning process that's kicking off now will lead to a new number that we're going to have to plan for in the next few years. And I'll go over this timeline in a minute or two to give you an idea of what that time frame is. But that's going to be a big deal. It always is a big deal. Historically, it has been a big deal. And in the last couple of years, with the dozens and dozens of state legislative initiatives and proposals that are bringing more serious implications for a community not meeting its RHNA targets, the importance of good planning around this numerical target is very important. The way it works is the State Housing Community Development Department comes up with a statewide number that they distribute to the different metropolitan areas within the state, and then each regional planning agency within different regions divides that into to each city within their region. So again, it's the ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments, that will take that number from HCD, come up with a complicated, or maybe not complicated, but certainly controversial formula for distributing that. And then we then have to work with that number. The other piece of the puzzle that is emerging just recently over the last few weeks actually is some changes to the priority development area designation. And this is another thing that's been kicking around for about 10 years. It's a way of cities, individual cities, identifying areas in the community where they would like to see a focus on development, and frequently is associated with more grant funds being available to cities within those planned development areas. And the work that ABAG and MTC is doing includes some proposed modifications, well, not proposed, they've already approved them actually, some modifications to the PDA programs. So cities are going to have to amend their PDAs. In Albany's case, we have one PDA that incorporates both San Pablo and Solano Avenue. We have one because there was a target acreage number, and we needed to combine all of it into one PDA in order to get close to that target acreage number. One of the things that we're learning from these newly adopted standards for PDAs is that we are going to need to amend our planned development area, and I'll go into the details of that process in a second. The sequence of events is fairly quick here, and some decisions are going to have to be made first at the staff level, which we really want your consultation, the City Council's consultation, and then ultimately the City Council. So maybe I'll go through this timeline that's on the screen just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on. So the first point on the timeline is, on the left side of the screen, is that by September 2019, a couple months, at least in the way we think about things. Just a few more commission meetings and a few more city council meetings to be able to talk about this. The ABAG is asking city staff to submit a letter of interest that the city of Albany is interested in amending our PDA. And this amendment would be something to the effect of, we're going to make some zoning changes that are going to increase the potential for housing development within the PDA. The city council themselves would have to pass a resolution by January of 2020, confirming that staff initial letter of interest. The other thing that we have going on, and I think we've talked about this a little bit in previous meetings, is we're preparing a grant application to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for what is being called SB2 funds. We're allocated $160,000, and every city in the state gets a certain amount of money. Smaller cities are getting $160,000 that we are to use to review our in our case, the planning and zoning regulations to make sure that we're having a regulatory framework that supports the development of housing at the densities that are in our general plan. And so we're our working title for that grant application is a housing implementation plan. And that's something that we want to work on in 2019, maybe rolling it into early part of 2020, but that's a near-term project for us to submit that grant application, actually get the money. It's non-competitive money, so we don't have to worry about not getting it, but we do have to submit the grant application and then start to work on that. So that's the second bullet point or the second stop on the timeline on the screen. The third stop is the preparation of the planned area, the 2050, and the associated preparation of the methodology and calculations for the RENA allocation. And that will be happening in 2020 and 2021. And then once that RENA number is established and approved by ABAG, we then have probably a couple of years to prepare a new housing element. And our housing element deadline for submittal to the state, and it's a hard deadline and it's a serious deadline if we don't hit it, is January 2023. So for practical purposes, we want to get it finished in 2022, late in 2022. Give ourselves a little bit of a cushion if something comes up at the last minute. Our thought process and how to manage all these different pieces, not all of which we completely understand where they're going, is after we go through the housing element, we'll know exactly what kind of, if any, additional changes that we might need to make to our PDA in order to support the targets that are going to be in our housing element. And so although we would be submitting a letter of interest or a resolution to start the planning process of PDA, we would recommend at this point at least not to actually do the work until the housing element is completed in 2022, according to the guidelines that are adopted by ABAG. This PDA planning process needs to be completed by 2025. So there, at a high level at least, there appears to be enough time in the sequence to do all this. A lot could change with the state legislature as active as they are. Who knows what we'll be dealing with. But at the moment, at least, this is kind of an initial outline of what's going on and how we think we can keep all the pieces together. I'm sorry, this is really kind of a wonky presentation and lots of acronyms and things. And if you looked at the materials that were attached to your agenda item, I really it's a very high-level summary. I didn't want to go through every detail of this. It'd be a little overwhelming probably. But I'm happy to try to answer any questions or take any direction that you have for additional work that we should do in the next few months.
Couple questions. What are the major changes that they're going to require? Just more density or lightening up the requirements for transit? Or
Major changes in the Plan Bay area?
yeah. So you said there are going to be changes in the priority development areas, but what changes are those?
So I have a slide on that. This is not my slide. This is an ABAG slide, but I think in anticipating that question, The left side of the screen shows the criteria today, which is basically an area that the community wants to see some growth, and it needs to have either a rail station like BART, a ferry terminal, or a 20-minute bus line, 20-minute service bus line.
But hold, Jeff, but how does that affect Albany? Because aren't we already in that zone? Except for the ferry terminal, I guess, but.
Well, these are the current guidelines. The new ones are a little different, and we don't comply with the new ones, according to their analysis. That we have, the new requirements are that a what they characterize as a transit-rich PDA has 15-minute headways on the transit, and as you can see, or basic transit, which are 30 minutes, between 15 and 30 minutes headways on transit. And then they also have these connected community designations, which are either high resource areas, which are areas with good school districts, or otherwise kind of a higher income areas, which Albany probably will be designated as a high resource area. Or that we adopt some programs like TDM, as you can see the bottom line on this side, adopt programs and policies that are related to transportation demand management or curb management, or Vision Zero for pedestrian and bicycle safety. So their determination for Albany is that we have we meet the basic transit requirements, but we don't meet the planning standards. Again, this is a ABAG slide, and we're in that second row of 19 PDAs where we have the transit, but not the planning, in their view, not the planning to support the necessary growth that they would like to see in our PDA. I kind of disagree with them about the planning, but that.
Yeah, how can we change it? Because we don't have any we can zone an area higher density and stuff, but we can't. Is that what they're asking for, a zoning?
Yes,
okay.
Basically. So we would modify our zoning ordinance, and there's a lot of merit to doing that to help us achieve the densities that we have in the general plan, but our zoning ordinance constrains our ability to reach that density through setbacks and open space requirements and so forth. So maybe we need to tweak those a little bit in particular places where we think there might be.
And then the next question was, what is the penalty if we don't do it? You said they're ratcheting up the penalty.
So if we don't have a PDA, we're less eligible for grants. And there have been, so that's one thing. The other thing is there have been, although I don't think they've passed yet, there have been legislative proposals that there be consequences for communities that plan but don't actually are perceived as not actually executing on achieving housing element RHNA allocations. And so instead of just having a plan that nobody hits, they're going to be allocating and incentivizing or penalizing, hopefully incentivizing, but at least there will be some consequences to communities that plan but don't see the actual growth occur. Don't know exactly what that is because it hasn't gotten all the way through the legislative process, but there's been a couple of different bills that have proposed that. So when the challenge here is there's potential for more serious consequences of not seeing housing actually developed. At the same time, it's going to be harder and harder to qualify for grant funding if we don't do something. And we could have kind of a divergence where we get pulled.
Right, I guess, yeah, I want Albany to come to the table and do what it needs to do. I'm fully supporting that, but I'm looking at other communities who are kind of dragging their feet and what if someday some communities come to the table and try to help out and others don't. And if the answer is that they don't get grants, what are the grants for? The grants there to help them get more housing, and they don't want those grants anyway, so what would be the problem? Unless there are other grants,
Well, for various transportation improvement, almost everything we do in the transportation realm is grant funded to one degree or another, particularly improvements. So things like the bikeway on Marin, we've got $400,000, more than $400,000 for some new signals on Masonic. Those kinds of programs are where we would be vulnerable to not getting those funds.
I see.
So we'd probably have enough money to kind of hang on to do some basic maintenance, but the improvement money in transportation, and to some degree, environmental as well. Creek improvements, it's kind of a check-the-box requirement these days that we're meeting we're in compliance with our housing element for all sorts of different grant funds that we take advantage of.
And I think I ask this from time to time. I might ask this every time you're here, but how is Albany doing on, progress toward our housing element goals and the RENA allocation? And I'm particularly interested, since we're having this PDA conversation, on, to the extent that there has been increased I guess I'm just curious, like, how much increased density has there been in our PDA since it's been, the existing one, since it's been established? Has that been an effective tool in actually, increasing housing production? Knowing that there's lots of other factors.
Yeah. I can't say that the fact that it's been designated as a PDA has made a bit of difference at this point, because it was just a designation. We didn't have to do anything to keep the designation. But with this new program, we will have to make some changes to keep it. To answer your question about the numbers, we've done pretty well, actually, in the above market category, or market category, above moderate income market rate housing category, with the Belmont Village project, 175 units, and over the last few years, probably 50 total ADUs, something in that neighborhood. So I think our RENA allocation was 335 units, and we're probably around 250 or something like that. Just rough round numbers, but that's the market rate.
And what period does that go through? I should know, but I don't.
2015 through 2023.
2023, okay.
Yeah. So we're doing okay. And as you know, we've been exploring the feasibility of an affordable housing project at Cleveland and Washington. That will be 60 units of extremely low income and very low income, and that will help us to some degree on the affordable housing side of it. I don't think we will ever get to all the affordable housing, hit our target for affordable housing, just simply because it's too expensive to build. We just don't have the financial resources to subsidize those projects, nor the land, really, at least right now.
I had a question also. How does the UC Village property relate to our arena goals? Are they since they're part of Albany's geography, do they contribute, or are they excluded?
They contribute, but as market rate.
Okay. Interesting.
And it's an interesting problem. The way the university manages their housing portfolio and the affordability for students is they charge the rents that they need to cover their debt service and their operating costs, and then they give scholarships or financial aid to the students to help them pay the full freight. Whereas other types of affordable housing, the rent is reduced. So I'd have to check their most recent rent rates, but maybe some of University Village counts as moderate income housing in the 80% to 120% of median income range. And although the students themselves are net paying quite a bit less than that, it doesn't meet the HCD criteria, so we're kind of out of luck there.
If they were to build more on their property, that would contribute to Albany's RENA goals?
Yeah.
Okay. And then one other question just that I have on this. So for the PDA that's identified as part of this stage, is it just the geography that has to be identified, or is there any proposed sort of density ratio or, any details about, height limits or density or anything like that within that, or any net new capacity within that area that would be accommodated? Like, what level of detail do we need to go into in identifying the geography here? I haven't
at least seen a quantitative target for, it has to be a certain number of units per acre or what have you. But the wording they use, I think, is significant housing growth and/or housing and employment growth at transit supportive densities, which is usually pretty significant densities. And then also California Environmental Quality Act documentation to allow that density to occur, development to occur at that density.
So if I get this right, then this process is really defining sort of the geography of Solano and San Pablo, and then future phases, basically we would come back with a much more sort of scalpel approach zoning proposal of sort of the parcel by parcel breakdown of what our zoning controls would be. So if we wanted different zoning at different, at the top of Solano or at the northern part of San Pablo, that would all be something we would deal with later.
Right, and it would be, I try not to be cynical about this stuff, but there's a certain degree of, we're going to make a commitment to do something and they'll tell us later what we really need to do. And that's sometimes how this works. So they want to know where we're going to have a PDA, then they're going to go do their planning process, and then they're going to give us a number, which we then have to meet, although we've committed to it 2 or 3 years earlier.
So isn't reviewing the whole San Pablo corridor in terms of density and everything, that's part of our work plan, right? So what you're telling me is that we could do a whole lot of work on that and it would be potentially inadequate.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Have to be
In the
redone.
perfect world, we'll do the SB2 planning, we'll make a bunch of improvements to the zoning code, and we might be done a few years early.
Is there any way, there's no real way to anticipate and move forward with regulations and zoning changes that would meet, I mean, I don't know how to get ahead of the game in a way. I mean, is it,
Are there like conversations that happen with HCD to get any sort of preemptive whiff of what our target might be?
Well, I don't think we're going to get that. That's kind of like, a top secret formula that nobody's going to let out of the safe. But I think we can think about and we can research what does a transit supportive density mean? What number is that? And what do we need to do in order to reach that number of units per acre? And if we do a good job with that, when we get our target, we can say, oh, look, it's, let's say instead of 335 units, what we have today, maybe it's 400 or 450. We can say, look, we've already got that. And it makes our housing element a lot easier.
Is there any risk of what Ian said, moving, if we put those bicycle trails in or the San Pablo corridor in too quickly that we don't get credit for it? All of a sudden, it's in before the general plan changes and now we have to do another thing equally?
I hope not. I think there are good reasons to do it irrespective of this planning process.
Right.
As the legislative process evolves, we'll learn over the end of, through this legislative session in 2019 and 2020, probably what the ground rules will be for the next housing element. So hopefully by the time we're making final decisions on the work that you're going to be doing on San Pablo corridor over the next year, maybe in 6 months or a year, we'll have a better idea. But I don't have that now.
well, we have the AC, or the Alameda County Transit Commission work on the corridor in terms of transit and mobility. And in some way, that's a great opportunity because it dovetails with what this definition of a PDA is, with offering a suite of mobility options, et cetera. I mean, that's a good way to converge these things.
Yeah.
And it seems like if the transit things are there, are already in place. That seems like only a plus to me. But I'm also concerned that whether we put plans in, well, when we put plans in place, there's no guarantee that they're implemented by developers, basically, or so.
If I could respond to that, I think that's a really good point, and we're working hard to develop at the staff level kind of informal relationships with the major property owners along San Pablo Avenue. And I think we've got those relationships. We know that there are potential sites. We can't put a checkbook in somebody's hands and get them to sign a check to start a project, but we do know that there are some people who own property that and just to give you an example, the Goodyear repair shop at San Pablo and Brighton, that's a piece of property that is on a fairly short-term lease, and the owner of the property might very well be interested in doing a housing development there. We talk to them, I don't know, a couple times a year probably to try to just lay that groundwork.
Yeah, and one other thing, just to add on to what Jeff was saying, Chris and I make it a point to kind of keep eyes out on properties that turn over and doing outreach with commercial real estate brokers. So a recent example is the Casper's hot dog site and the adjacent property are both on the market. They have different ownership, but serendipitously they have the same broker. We had a really good meeting with that broker who is marketing both properties concurrently to basically identify that there's this enhanced development potential with the two parcels together. What was really helpful, though, in our conversation when we went through our current regulations with him, he shook his head and he said, this is really not going to work for a lot of developers because the density isn't there. And he kind of walked us through his understanding of what it would take to make it pencil for and make it attractive for a developer. So as we're going through crafting enhanced zoning standards, I anticipate that's a conversation that we'll have again and solicit input from the brokerage community.
Do you have an inventory of kind of appropriate properties, lots on San Pablo, or even Solano? Solano seems harder, but
yeah, I mean,
doable for maybe 4-unit buildings or.
Yeah, we have our housing element opportunity sites. That's really the only sort of mechanism we have right now. But, as we've watched properties turn over, we're kind of keeping eyes out on where there's potential for new infill development.
Quick question, just on the one that you were discussing for the Caspers, have they sort of discussed at all using state density bonus at all in order to increase density?
Yeah, we actually had Jeannie Iceberg, our contract planner, do a little quick and dirty density bonus table that they could provide to prospective buyers so they would understand that, okay, even with their limited development potential based on our regulations, here's what could be done under state density bonus law. So it adds some incentive. It's still not ideal, I think. The goal would be to have ultimately more height within the zoning district, but it certainly helps.
Yeah. Obviously, with state density bonus, they could get more height if they need the height. So,
What would be our work plan timeline for the San Pablo zoning reevaluation? Would that be
This year.
Yeah.
I met
this year, 2019, 6 months?
2000, yeah, I mean, it's going to probably take more than 6 months, but actually I met with Jean this morning, and we're going to have, there's going to be a forthcoming meeting on your calendar next week, because we want to get the ball rolling. Jeff and I attended a meeting at MTC, specifically on SB2. The good news is we're actually much farther along than other jurisdictions in terms of our application completeness. And, I think we could start even before we get the grant money just based on some money that we have set aside for her contract. But she has an urban designer that she's going to sub with who's going to do a lot of the graphics and the visual groundwork to help us with the process.
That's referring also to design guidelines, not just.
Yeah, so it's objective design standards, but I think the one thing that we've found over the years with using our code is we really need good visual communication even within the zoning code to convey some of the, the other standards that we have in there.
Jeff, I was curious, when I heard you mention the piece about, and I'm going to ask you to say what it was again, because now I'm forgetting, but the needing to provide for essentially CEQA clearance to accommodate the density that you want. And so I wanted to hear a little bit more about what that actually means. Like, is there, I assume it's just a mandate to do some kind of programmatic EIR that projects can then document their compliance with, not like directing cities to get rid of so many discretionary approvals that would fall under CEQA in the first place, or are there different ways of getting at it?
A little bit of both. And the third piece of that is whether there might be some of these parcels could very well qualify for an infill exemption under CEQA, which is the most expedited form of that.
Sure.
If there are properties that don't, or because of the scope of what we're doing with zoning changes, we need to do a programmatic EIR, then yeah, we would have to do that in order to meet the new PDA requirements. And then a potential applicant can use that programmatic EIR to get their project through the planning process. And the third piece of it is SB 35, which is a state law from 2017, which if you have a certain amount, in our case 50% more of a project is affordable housing, then you're exempt from CEQA. And that is a ministerial permit under SB 35 as it stands today. That's state law.
Right.
So kind of.
That's going to be a very small number of projects that
Right.
ever pursue that.
If we could somehow arrange a partnership between a property owner and an affordable housing developer, then there might be an opportunity.
Yeah, okay. But it's like, so it sounds like it's not super prescriptive about how you meet this CEQA piece of the requirements?
I think that's right. The level of information I have it was in those attachments, and it doesn't,
okay.
They're beautiful PowerPoints and everything, but they're not.
They leave a lot of questions.
They leave a lot of questions. It's
Yeah.
just when you really get down to it, it's just a sentence or two that says, get the CEQA done, whatever that meant.
Yeah, okay.
But the goal is to streamline the process for getting projects approved,
Yep. That's
reduce the time period, get the projects approved and going, right? So-
That's the mandate that's coming out of the state legislature and the governor's office, and whether people agree with that or not, that's the message, is it's taking too long, and because it's taking too long, we're not seeing the rate of housing development that the region needs, and that's why we have an affordable housing crisis.
I guess my thought would be that we should move forward as, quickly as we can, and I mean, if the first step is just submitting the letter of intent, right? And that really doesn't take any work on our part, or very.
Right,
We're going to do that. That's a matter of course, right? That's,
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question.
Well, that's why we're here, to make sure there aren't any questions.
Oh, well, I mean, I would support submitting that letter of intent immediately.
I think the ABAG MTC staff envision that would be something that staff would do without consulting with our policymakers, but I'm not going to do that without consulting with policymakers. And so it starts with you as the commissioners, and then city council ultimately. But yeah, I'm supposed to sign the letter. And then the city council a couple months later comes back and says, in a more formal way, confirms that.
But we don't need to vote on that. No, you don't need a formal
I might
approval?
ask, this was just an introductory session. You can tell us how deeply you want to be involved, but I think the council would always benefit from your insights and recommendations. And my first reaction is, yes, I think I would like to come back at a future meeting, probably in the next month or so, and say, could you make a recommendation to the city council about this?
Well, personally, I'm happy to support that.
It's like it falls right in our bailiwick, so to speak, right? But one more question. Is it that there's so many state assembly bills that are kind of like getting ahead of the, zoning codes of cities? Is that a concern that, we're going through this process, but meanwhile, the state just kind of jumps ahead of us and starts implementing?
I stopped trying to keep track of the legislation because there's just so many and it kept on changing. But yeah, it's part of the uncertainty of all this is, if the legislation that was going to propose fourplexes in a single-family residential neighborhood by right, I mean, that completely changes the math of development potential in Albany. That particular bill, I think, is it now a 2-year bill, and that doesn't, I can't imagine that passing, but anyhow. But that's just a hypothetical example. But yeah, that we could go through this very systematic and process with ABAG and MTC, and the state legislature could come up with something completely different and just throw a big wrench in it.
But I guess, big picture, it's very clear that everything is pointed in the direction of plan for more density and, and streamline the process to get there.
Yep.
Right? So, like, I think there's a lot of work that you're doing and that this commission will probably be doing that's, like, there's no, it seems highly unlikely that it would be wasted, even though all this stuff is very in flux, right?
Right. And it's going to be San Pablo Avenue because of the transit headways.
Of course.
So yeah, for us, it's not hard to know what to do.
A few years ago, we had 5 development scenarios for the Bay Area. And one was 3 mega cities or something, and then there was one was sprawl, and one was satellite cities. It was 4 or 5. Are any of those kind of like the goal here, or that just kind of thrown out and we're just kind of densifying everybody equally across the board?
So that's the Plan Bay Area 2050 process that they're just about to start. Well, not about it. They're going to start in 2020. And you're right. They had those 3 different scenarios, and that was the Plan Bay Area 2040. This time they've done some issue papers that are kind of more thinking about the future and what's going on with transportation and autonomous vehicles and what's going on in the changes in the workforce and workplace with technology. So I haven't seen anything about the different kind of urban forms or heard anything about that. Maybe that will come out later. But I think they're really thinking about just the changes in technology-driven workplace and transportation. And if you would like, I could organize all that for you, and you can see that at a future meeting if you really want to get super wonky.
Well, I don't want to put a bunch of extra work on you, but it's interesting to see how they relate.
I'll just chime in. I mean, I think this is great. I think we should move forward. I mean, the fact that it's not prescriptive, it's not locking us into any one specific proposal, it seems kind of a no-brainer that obviously we'll have conversations about Solano and San Pablo being our places to increase density as our first stop, at least in this larger densification era that we're in. So I don't see any reason why not to.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
No. All right. That closes item 7.1. Moves us on to item 8 on our agenda, announcements, communication, discussion.
Yeah, just one announcement, more of a summary for the commission. Satellite Affordable Housing Associates had their first community engagement workshop on May 23rd at the community center. It was really well attended. There were probably about 50 or 60 people there, and they gave an overview about their company, allowed for Q&A about affordable housing and projects that they've done, and then they had sort of breakout groups to review preliminary plans. Their architect was there to answer questions, and they said they received a lot of positive feedback. So right now they're in the process of refining their plans, and they anticipate having another public workshop probably in the next month or so. So we will keep you posted.
All right.
The only other announcement we have is just that we got our award for the residential design guidelines. So we're doing a little show and tell tonight.
From who? Who gave you the award?
Down.
APA? Or?
Was that APA?
Yeah, for the residential design guidelines.
That's great. All right. Great. Well, with that, item 9, next meeting is June 26th, and there are no meetings in August, so August recess. So with that, we are adjourned.
Great.